Before we jump into the code, I do want to kind of skim over the theory a little bit, just to kind of talk about what we're building today and where it fits in. So the recycler view is basically where it fits in is anytime you need to display a list of things, it's the control you want to use. That's basically what you want to know. If it's a list, it's either going to be, if you want it to be all of it to be visible, it's going to be a recycler view, unless of course you want it to be like a drop down, in which case you're going to use a spinner. So, your lists are basically always, it's going to be a recycler view or it's going to be a spinner, one of those two things. As far as, basically you use it and, it's designed to be used with large number of lists or lists that are changing where you're adding and removing items, whether that be because the user's adding and removing them, or because you're showing like the nearby Wi-Fi networks or nearby Bluetooth devices where, the hardware is changing, those kind of things, or search results or whatever it may be. So we really use it as I was kind of saying, anytime you have a list is where it comes up. And it works really well for large number of items. And actually what I mean by large number of items, I mean like 100 or more is where it really shines. And if that number sounds pretty low, yes, that is because, when you're thinking about Android, you have to realize, first of all, you have less memory to work with, so you got to be more conservative with that. There's also a lot of overhead in terms of showing views. So one of the things that RecyclerView does is it really cuts down how many views you have to create or keep up to date. Traditionally, before the recycler view, the control that we had before that was called the list view, which actually still exists. But you're strongly recommended not to use that one ever. So the list view historically was created to kind of do this thing in a very similar fashion. There's a lot of things that are similar between a list view and a recycler view, and a lot of the kind of lessons here that with how the recycler view is built is really learned from how the list view worked and some issues there. Now, one of the guidance that you may hear is you say, well, only use the recycler view for large amounts of things. I would disagree with that. I would say even for small things, even for small lists, say you have 10 or less items, you should still use a recycler view. Because there are a lot of benefits, even for small lists, that is really worth going ahead and putting a recycler view in. Plus, oftentimes, anytime you have a list, it's very likely that that's going to grow over time. So it's good to future-proof yourself and just say, well, we're going to build a recycler view. We'll forget about this list view thing, which is, basically why I don't teach the list view anymore, is because the recycler view just does everything that it does, everything the list view does, but better. So this is kind of what you're going to see, right? So we've got a list of things here. This is a very simple version of the list. But each of these are kind of an item. So here they've got words, right? And so, again, so one of the things that it's really good at is dealing with when you have a large list. It's also really good for when your data set is changing, which is pretty common, pretty common that if you have a data set or a list of some sort, there's a lot of things that may result in that data changing, whether because of something the user did or something else that's happening with the system. So those are things to think about. So, part of the idea of what we want to do is we're going to kind of create some views, and let's just kind of reuse those views is our objective. So in terms of performance, we want to conserve memory. We do that by minimizing, first of all, how many views we create in the first place, and then we also, minimize kind of how many views that we keep around. So the recycler view sort of looks like this conceptually if you think about how it operates. So, and this may look familiar. This kind of looks like maybe your email client, maybe like Gmail, right? So each of these items represents an email, right? So the way the Recycler View works, you see each of these blue boxes. That is an item or a layout for an item. And so it'll keep the ones that, you have some of them that are on screen, but you also have a few that are before the screen and after the screen, or kind of waiting in the wings. And so what it'll do is it'll kind of just populate, it'll take the data, populate it into those views, and reuse them as you scroll up and down. So rather than creating a new view every time a new thing appears, it just kind of reuses one that it created earlier. So if you're scrolling down, the ones up top are kind of disappearing off your screen. It will say, okay, I don't need those anymore, and it'll put new data in them and stick them at the bottom of the screen. And that leads to some really smooth scrolling, which is really important. If you're working with a list of things, your users expect it to be scrolling smoothly. You don't want to have a janky sort of stutter when the user's scrolling up and down the list. Any questions so far?
That's pretty clever.
So, honestly, I wish that the Recycler View existed in every UI framework, because every UI framework runs into this problem where you have long lists of things that you need to show. It's just something that, hey, it's nice. Thankfully, it's built into Android directly. If you're building it, but if you're building like desktop apps, you're building web apps, you may find yourself building something like this basically from scratch, because there's not something built into most desktop frameworks or web already. So if you use Twitter a decent amount of time, also with Facebook, you'll notice that your Twitter feed actually kind of does this, the way that Twitter's built, because if you sort of scroll down, you'll notice that the tweets kind of pop in, right? So they're not initially all there. It doesn't download all the tweets. It kind of downloads them or pulls them in as you scroll down. It also drops off tweets that are up on the top of the list. So this does occur in a web world, but you have to kind of build that control yourself. And we see here, he says Recycler View is a more advanced and flexible version of the list view. It's basically built on top of those ideas, but much, much better. And that's why I would say just always use the Recycler View over the list view. So, kind of prefacing and orienting us for what we're going to be doing. So, in terms of getting the Recycler View working, this specific behavior of knowing what's on screen and what's off screen and doing that, basically that's the part you don't have to generally do much with. That part, which is the hard part, is actually taken care of you. So you don't have to worry about knowing, how many items forward do you need to create or how many items backward do you need to create. Recycler View takes care of that. So all you have to do is tell the Recycler View, when it asks for a new item, give it a new item. When it asks for you to put the data into that item, then do that. So there's a bunch of components that we have to have in place to make this work. So I would definitely recommend taking notes as we're going through this, because there's a bunch of things, and with the number of things that we're going to cover, there's probably going to be a few things that you forget. So I would definitely recommend taking notes of the things as we go through them, so that you can refer back to those later as reminders and such. So what I want to kind of explain here is the different pieces, the different components that go into the Recycler View working. And as we go into the practical portion, we're going to create each of these pieces. We're going to have to work with each of these things. So the first thing you have to have is you have to have data. And it doesn't matter where the data is stored, it doesn't matter where it comes from, but you need to have data, right? So if you're thinking about like an e-commerce store, well, you need products. If you're thinking about fulfilling orders, well, you need orders somewhere. If you're thinking about job listings, well, you need jobs that needs to be somewhere, and your job applications need to be somewhere. So you need to have your data somewhere where you can use it and show it in the list. Now, for this exercise, we're just going to hard code that data in. We're just going to write it out in Java, and that's going to be the data that we provide. What we're working towards is, once we kind of understand how to get that data into the recycler view, in later lessons we'll talk about how to get it from a few different sources. So, for instance, how do you get it from, let's say you want to get your list of things from a database, or from a REST API, or from a GraphQL API, or whatever other API that's available on the internet. You may want to pull it in from there. Let's say you have images that you need to pull in from the internet. That may be a thing there as well. Or you may have Firebase, different things like this. You can have a lot of different sources. The main one I'm going to focus on in future lectures is the cloud. Different ways that you can store that data in the cloud and pull it in. But for now, we're just focusing on how do you actually get the data display, assuming you already have the data. And later we'll talk about how to get the data. So you need to have some data. And generally that data is going to come in one or two forms. It's going to be either a list or it's going to be an array. Most commonly, it's going to be a list. So what we're really talking about here is taking a list that we've gotten from somewhere else and showing it. Next thing we need is the recycler view. That recycler view is what we're going to actually add to our activity layout. And so it's going to take up a portion of the screen space. There's also, we need to create a layout for each item, and that'll actually be a separate layout file. So like right now we have a activity main represents the main activity, but we'll also add like a item product layout, which will represent an individual item on that list. So we'll need to create an additional layout to represent each item that appears in the list. And one of the kind of implications there, so let's say you have one page that shows a list of products, another that shows a list of maybe images, product images, or another screen that shows a list of orders, or maybe a fourth screen that shows a list of items within that order. Each of those is a separate recycler view and means that you're going to have to do all this work for that case. So in real-world apps, which is kind of where we're trying to go, recognize that you're not just going to have one of these recycler views, you're going to have lots of them. Okay, so it's really important to get used to how these operate. But for each of those different recycler views, we're generally going to have a different item layout. So this may result in you having maybe 5 additional layouts, namely for the different items in your application that you need to show. Okay. Next piece we need is a layout manager. And so that layout manager can be a few different things. The layout manager determines how the items are kind of organized within the recycler view. So the most common way that we organize them is just top to bottom. We'll use what we call a linear layout manager, and that will say, okay, the items start at the top, end at the bottom. We can also use a linear layout manager to organize them left to right. If you're thinking about product images, oftentimes the user's kind of swiping left to right through the product images. That would be a recycler view with a horizontal sort of layout. You also see on larger devices, namely tablets, we'll use a grid layout manager, and that will kind of lay things out in 2D as tiles. There's also a third one in there, which I'm not going to get into today, called the Staggered grid layout manager, if you have different things that are, your items are different sizes. So there's a few different ways that you can lay out the items, and that's one of the things you have to specify. The next piece that we need, and this is where we get into starting writing our actual code, is we need an adapter. And so that adapter will be a subclass of RecyclerView.adapter. That's what actually connects things from the items, from the data that we have, to the views that get displayed. So it's kind of an in between. It's a conversion from the data to the views. So that's the part that really provides the connection point for the Recycler View. Also in there, we'll need to create a subclass of the RecyclerView.Viewholder class. And what that does is it contains the individual views within the item layout. And we use that so that we can reuse the item layouts rather than having to create a new item every time that we have a new one show up. So that's just kind of the Viewholder will be a very, very small class. And one of the things I will say about the Viewholder, after doing this a bunch of times and kind of thinking about how this operates, I don't write my Viewholders as it shows in the tutorials. So my Viewholders I actually write in a different way nowadays, because I've kind of come to some conclusions about what those need to do and what makes sense for how to implement them. So the way I'm going to show you how to build those Viewholders will be different than if you look up a tutorial. They're going to show you a different way to do it. There's a reason that I do it the way I do now. Okay. So, to kind of think about the diagram, how this works, you've kind of got the data here over on the left. So here they've got the data, item is a word. That goes through the word list adapter. Word list adapter turns it into or connects the data to a Viewholder. So this is kind of holding those Viewholders. And then that finally gets shown in the Recycler View, which the Recycler View kind of uses that layout manager to show the individual items. Okay. So there's a lot of components to that, and that's part of why we're going to be writing a lot of code today, is because there's all of those different components.
Hey, Mr. Smith, quick question. How long has this been around?
How long has this been around?
Yeah, like what API did it come in with?
That's a very good question. So the Recycler View was never and has never been part of core Android, per se. So it actually is not tied to a particular API. It's always been shipped as a Maven or a Gradle package that you bring in. So if you look into the core API docs for Android, you won't find the Recycler View. So it's always been shipped as part of the support libraries, which now have been rolled over to Jetpack. So it's actually, you have to bring in additional dependency to use the Recycler View.
Okay, all right.
The upside of that, because it's not part of the core Android, and this is why Android shifted to putting a lot of things into Jetpack, is that means you can use it realistically on any version of Android.
Yeah, right. It just improves the life cycle of some of these older systems.
So like if they had shipped the time stuff, the java.time stuff, as part of Jetpack, we would have been able to use it today. We would have been able to use it all the way back potentially to like API 7 or so, if they had shipped it as a separate library and not made it part of the Android core. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
That's why they're shifting to putting a lot less into the core APIs and putting a lot more into Jetpack, because then it's not tied to a specific version of Android. So that's great. That means that we won't have to do any sort of conditionals or say, if it's this version, then use this. If it's this version, then use this. It's going to work with all of the versions of Android right now that are on the market. All right, so let's get into the code. And so this is this section talking about the components. There's more information as you read down. They'll kind of explain a little bit more about these individual components. But I would definitely take a note on what those are and kind of watch as those things fit together. Okay. So I'm going to bring up, we'll go back into the project. So our objective today is I'm going to take this main activity screen here, and we're going to convert this over to a recycler view. And if we have time, I also want to maybe add a screen to view an individual product, right? So basically this is going to turn into kind of a list of products, if that makes sense. That's what I'm going to put here. So
we're putting this in 4.4, right? Copy that over and move it.
We'll do this in 4.5. So I'm going to actually close my project here and do that now. So right now we've been working in 4.3. So I'm going to copy 4.3 over to 4.5. So again, this is 4.5. This is not 4.4.
So what are we going to do with the 4.4 then? I guess it's just combined with the 4.3 labs from previous days.
We'll put it into this 4.5 project on Monday. So there won't end up being anything in the 4.4 folder. That one will just end up being empty. Okay, so copy 4.3 Droid Cafe over to 4.5, and then I'm going to open that up in Android Studio. So let me see. Okay, so opened an existing project. I'm going to open up 4.5 Droid Cafe. There we go. So while this is loading up, kind of the first thing you want to think about as you're building the recycler view out, the first question is, what data do you need to have? You know, what are the items that you're trying to show, and what data do they have on them that you potentially would need to store or display? Okay, so if we're thinking about this application, right, I kind of see on the home screen that I've got basically a list of 3 products, right? And ideally in this process, I might want to maybe be able to add some more, but I've got products on my home screen, right? And if we kind of look at the layout as is, that layout only has two pieces of information. It is, you've got an image, and then you've got a description of the product. That's all that we have visible here. In real world applications, you usually have a little bit more than that, right? So you really have to think about, you know, what is the data that I need, and how do I need to store it, right? And so conventionally, remember there was a tool that I taught you guys last semester in terms of modeling your database? Do you remember what that was?
I'm sorry, say that again.
There was a tool that we went over last semester in terms of modeling your database.
Modeling.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the ERD?
ERD, which stands for
Entity relationship diagram.
Right. Any relationship diagram. So before we get started, that would be the first thing I would recommend diagramming is, you know, diagram your ERD to figure out, you know, what data you need. Or you could start with Balsamic and figure out what data you need there. But the point is you kind of need to know what am I going for? What do I need this to display, right? So in my case here, I want it to show products, right? So the first thing I need to do is I need to create a class to store that data. So the first class I'm going to create, I'm going to say new Java class, and this will be the product class. Okay, so we've done a little bit of this before. So some of this will be kind of a rehash of things we've done previously, but I need this product class to store the data. And traditionally we call this the model in terms of kind of thinking about things in model view controller. So model being the place where you store the data. Usually that ends up being connected to the database. View being what the user sees, and then the controller kind of being the code in between. So in the product, right, let's think about, what data do I probably need for this? What data typically would you want if you're showing products to your users?
Are you talking about like title, image, description?
Okay, yeah, those are good things. So I might say, if I'm thinking about that, I might call it maybe the product name more than the title. So I might say, okay, so we've got a name, we've got a description, name, description, maybe a price. I might need to have maybe an image. Now, that's, there's a question with images in terms of Android is how do you store them? And that right there is a non-trivial question, I will say. Actually getting images stored and how to work with them takes a lot of work, and there's a lot of complexity that comes there. Partly because you have different kind of cases, right? So you have these resources, right, that we've put into the drawable folder, right? So those are resources that we have provided. And in fact, these are shipped as part of the app, but the user's not able to change those. Like, these are built in as we build the APK, but the user can't add any more of these drawable resources. So if they want to upload images from their camera or things like that, that won't work. Okay, so you end up with a few different approaches where you have to think about, where is the image coming from? Okay, so and that will change how you deal with the image. Okay, is everybody with me there?
Yeah.
So you have a few different options. One of the options is you can say, well, I'm only going to use images that come with the application. In that case, all I need is an integer to store the resource ID. If I want to say, let's use images that are only images that are hosted online, right? Well, if it's hosted online, I probably have... How would I access the image if it's hosted online?
Just a URL should do it.
Probably a URL. So if I was hosting them online, I probably have a URL, which I would store as a string, right? So if you're hosting all of your images online, you can just have URLs to them. If you're having all your images be within the app that are bundled, and the user can just pick from those images that you've provided, then an integer is enough. But if you need to have the user actually upload their own images, which is in reality most applications requirements, then you have to deal with things differently. Okay, so it's important to think about what is going to be the specific case for your application. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So kind of going through those options. So maybe let me make some notes. So this might be private int image res ID pointing to a resource ID if we're storing it locally, or if this would be if it's bundled with app. If it was stored online, then I might do private int image URL. Or if it's provided by the user, that would actually be a string. Then it may be a drawable object. Okay. So you can build this out with any of those three options. I will say that this third option requires a lot more code. Okay, a lot more code than I can feasibly cover today. This option here, if you're going to use URLs, there are two different libraries that are out there and available that most people use in terms of loading images from online. One of them is called Picasso, and another one is called Glide. Both of those get used pretty often. We will later in the course we'll talk about how to use Picasso to load these images from online. Okay, so we'll cover these options at a later point in time. What I'm going to do today is just this option, which means that the only images that you'll be able to use are images that are already part of the application. Does that make sense? Kind of keeping it simple. So just to be clear, this way is not going to work if I need the user to be able to provide images. So I'm going to add a field in there. I'm going to call it image res ID. The reason I call it that and not just image, it's not just say image, is because, well, I need to know what kind of thing it is, right? Is it a resource ID? Is it a URL? Is it a drawable? It's very helpful to clarify what that is rather than just saying image. So I would ask that as you're building these apps, please, please, please do not call this property just image. Is everybody with me there?
Yeah.
Yep.
So you can use any of those three names. Just the point is suffix it with what kind of image is it, how are you storing it. The other thing I will want to add is I will want some way to identify the images. So I might add a string or an integer to store the product ID. So here I'm going to store it as a string. Okay. So that way I can later kind of have a unique identifier for the individual products, which I'll need if I'm using any sort of online resource or if I want to have another page where I can maybe view details or add it to my cart, etc.
Is that something kind of like a key value pair where you have the ID which would identify it and then there's the actual image?
This is, what do you mean?
Well, the way I understood it is you got the image, right? In this case where you've got ones that are provided in our little system here, but the ID, or I'm sorry, the image itself, you can't see it. It's not too useful, right? Because it's an int. Yeah. So you need to have something that's describing it, right? So
the int will be enough for us to get it to show on screen.
Oh,
in
sure.
this case.
All right, but I don't understand what line 4 does.
So line 4 here?
Yeah, isn't that tied to the image?
No.
I mean, no. I mean, it's not actually, but it's going to describe it, right?
No, it is the ID for the product, not this has nothing to do with the image.
All right. Just like just like any product number.
Yeah,
all right.
Just the product number. So, all right. So we've got some fields. So that's where you got to kind of start by making this object with your data, right? Figuring out what that data is. So that's kind of step one. And so this code is obviously going to be different wherever you put it in, right? Whatever app you build, that is not going to be the same. So this is where you kind of can see already as we build out these recycler views, it's really on a situation by situation basis. Right? We have to, we're building custom code for the problem we're trying to solve. Okay. So this is not code that you can just say, well, I'm going to copy and paste it into some other project and it'll work, because it really depends on the data that you're trying to show and how you're storing that data. Okay, so things I need to do. This is a model class. Remember my model classes, typically I want to have like a constructor, right? So that's the first thing I'm going to put in here is a constructor for the product. So public product, and in there I'm just going to take all of the values that we just declared. So string ID, string name, the string description, the float price, the image resource ID, and then in there I just need to save all those values. So this.id is equal to ID, this.name is equal to name, this.description is equal to description, this.price is price, and this.image resource ID is image resource ID. Okay. Now, one thing I want to mention real quick on this point here, if you just look at this constructor, right, this we can read from the name that we know it's a resource ID, but as far as it's concerned, it's just an int. So typically anytime you have like resource IDs that you're passing around or things like that, there's an annotation or two that you usually want to add to specify what that integer means. And the reason we do that is it gives us better code suggestion in terms of Android Studio, so it kind of knows what kind of thing should be there and how it should be used. So I'm going to push this down a little bit so it's not one giant line. And what I'm going to add here, I'm going to say at, what is it? Drawable res. That's the one I want. At drawable res. And that is in the Android X annotation package. So drawable res tells Android Studio that this should be an ID for an image. Does that kind of make sense?
And that's just built in?
That's just built in. So that means if I try to pass, for instance, 3 here, Android Studio will say, no, you shouldn't do that because you need to give me an ID for a resource. It'll also give you errors if you try to pass in like a layout here, right? Because we want it to be, or a color, because we want it to be an image. Does that make sense? So that's just there to give us proper warnings. So the next thing we want to do is, now that we've got our constructor, we just need to add all of our getters. So public int, or public string, get ID, and so that's going to return the ID. And I'm going to just go through down the line with each of these, and they're going to return their respective values. So get name is going to return the name. Public string, public string description. So we're going to say get description. And so that's there, and then public float, get price. And then lastly, we're going to say public int get image res ID.
So I don't know if it does it on yours, but on mine, I don't even have to really type anything. I'll just type in like PU, and then it'll give me the entire string of code.
Okay. I would still really ask that this is a good thing to get in the habit so you know what it should look like. Which is why I'm going ahead and typing it all out today.
Yeah, I got you.
So these are, this is something that you want to kind of have down rote, memorized. You can do it on autopilot. So another thing here, just like I added this annotation to the constructor, I also need to add this annotation to my getter for get image resource ID. So the Android Studio knows that this is returning a resource ID, a drawable resource ID. Okay. Any questions so far?
I got to look at the drawable thing up there. Something I got gummed up there. It's not working for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's worth noting anytime you're writing these annotations, they always have to be before the thing you're annotating. So here it's before the field, here it's before the method. So,
okay. I was missing int.
Okay. Yeah, that would do it. Okay. So, and then the last thing I want to do before I leave here is I want to add some setters. So generally things you want to set up anytime you're making one of these classes, set up the constructor, set up the getters, and set up the setters as well. So down here on the bottom, we'll add the setters. Setters don't return anything, so they'll all be void. And so I might say set ID, and that would take an ID. So int, usually I just specify these as value to keep my code short. So int value, and then this is going to say the ID is equal to value. Oh, this is a string, not an int. So, and then set name, public void, set name. And so string name, oh, I want to call that value. Name is equal to value. And so set description. And yeah, that's what you're talking about. Now, oftentimes I'll write that as such, where the input is value rather than using the same name twice. But that's really a matter of style that you can do one way or the other. So we've got the description. We need to set price. And we need to set image resource ID. So you should have something like that. And then just like we have with the constructor, the getter, we also need to add that annotation on the setter as well. But we add it on the value. So give people a few minutes to finish typing. Any questions here?
Nope.
If you would put this, I'd say like whatever, line 41, where it's purple, is that would break it, right? I mean,
no, it would work. It would work. The reason that it's purple is actually because this is implied. That's why it's showing up in purple, is because it knows that it's a field, and so it's appearing purple because the this is basically implied. So you can put the this on, or you can leave it off. In that case, all these places here, it's just implied. So you can include it or leave it out.
If you start typing the word set, it will prompt you for the other the variable names up there, but it doesn't fill in the values the correct way. Like, for example, the parameter won't be called value.
That's fine, right? If you want to leave it as that, that's fine. That's perfectly correct. There's nothing wrong about that.
Yeah, right. You can call it whatever you want.
There is nothing wrong about writing the code this way. There's nothing wrong about writing the code that way.
Oh, why would you use value? Is it just
I'm just saving,
or you've been doing it that way?
I'm saving some characters, and B, I'm avoiding the fact that here you see you have image resource ID, you have some shadowing going on, because the field, the parameter is the same name as the field.
Okay, you're avoiding that.
If I'm writing it by hand, I find it better to, especially if I'm writing it by hand or if this gets bigger, I usually find it better to write it as value, but I'm not going to count any points off if you write it this way whatsoever. The catch, though, is if you write it this way, the word this is required. You do have to put in the word this if you're going to use the same, if you're not going to use value as the parameter name. Which, that's why it adds it in automatically, because it's required. You see that it kind of goes gray if I don't have the word this there?
Yes.
Because then, without this, it's referring to this field. So this actually does nothing if I write it this way. It's just assigning a value to itself. It's not actually updating the field.
Yeah, you would need this in this case, yeah.
Yeah, you need this if you write it that way. If you call it value, well, I've got no fields named value, and so therefore I don't have a conflict in naming. The other reason I do this is because this is basically how C# does it. Is basically if you're writing properties in C#, it has this same sort of syntax where it's always called value. So that's actually kind of inherited from all the programming I've done in C#.
Yeah, we don't need to go deep into this, but is there a that?
No, there's no that.
Okay.
There's two special keywords, this and super.
I saw a which somewhere. WHICH. I saw that in somewhere in the code in this week.
I don't remember what context that shows up in. But I would say this and super are the two magic words you want to know about. This refers to my class itself, my object itself, and super refers to the parent class.
Okay.
So those are the two special keywords. So the next thing I'm going to do is, now that we've got kind of a way to store our data, is I want to have some or at least to model the type of data we want to store, is add another class which is going to kind of hold all of that data. So the new class I'm going to create, I'm going to call this product data source. And this is not explicitly required, okay? You can totally build a recycler view without this class in place. This is going to help us by making this class. This helps us work towards where we're going, where the data is not going to be stored in our app. It's going to be stored somewhere else. So this is the reason I'm making this class, okay? And so that way we can kind of change the internals of it later on without changing our entire application, okay? And so this product data source, you can kind of think of it as our database, right? So this is going to be the connection point with wherever we store our data. So methods that I want to have on here, I probably want to have some way to get all the products. So I might say public list product I want to have some way to get all the products, so I might say get all. And so I've got that, get all. We'll come back and implement that. What else might I need? I need to be able to get all the products. What else?
Update.
Update? Okay, that's a possibility. I'm not going to worry about changing the data right now.
Maybe the quantity.
What do you mean the quantity?
Well, we're going to order stuff, right? So it's going to show up later. So you can hit the froyo, for example, like 3 or 4 times. There'd be a quantity in there, yeah?
I'm not going to worry about that today. And that wouldn't be a method on here. That would be another field probably on the product.
Okay. Isn't there a delivery?
Orders or things like that. Huh?
Isn't there a delivery? I have to look at the...
Yeah, we're not modeling that today. Remember, we're trying to work towards a recycler view.
Okay, I don't know.
Right.
I mean, we pretty much covered it in the constructor, right?
Well, you're forgetting, you're misunderstanding what's here. This represents a single product, right? This represents our database of products.
Okay, so it's all right.
Right. So if I want to be able to work with those products, well, I need to have some way to get all of the products. What I'm looking for is the other part is I probably need some way to get a single product, right? So I might say get by ID. And so this would take an ID, and then I can go find a particular product with that ID. Does that make sense? So I can add a bunch of methods here that we can then later use throughout the application. Okay? So if we think about the data I need to store in here in this data source, remember, I'm not going to be connecting to the outside world. I want to store it locally here in memory. I probably want to create a list. So I might say in here we've got private list of products. And so this would be our products, right? So internally to this class, we're going to store a list of products. Everybody with me here so far?
Yeah.
So both of these are going to be accessors into that list. Okay. So kind of like we did with this class, we had created a constructor, we had created getters, we had created setters. In this case, I'm not going to create any setters. I'm just going to create the constructor and getters. Because again, we're not modifying any data today. So what I want to do here is going to say constructor. The constructor always has the same name as the class. So this would be public product data source. It's not going to take any arguments. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up that list. So products is equal to new list of products. Oh, nope. That is not what I wanted. I don't want list of products. I want an array list. There we go. And so actually this can probably internally be an array list. That's fine. Yeah.
Why are we doing that?
Because I specifically am going to store it in an array list, not just a general list.
Yeah, you always want to be more specific if you know.
Not true. It's yeah.
Isn't that because it's an object, Mr. Smith?
Huh?
Isn't that because it's an object?
It's because kind of internally to this implementation, I may care that it's an array list and not a linked list. But to the external world, right, that's using this, they don't know where that list is coming from. I don't want to leak that detail. So getAll is going to return a list, not an array list, even though internally I'm keeping it as an array list. It's this idea of encapsulation, right? So in terms of inside of this class, it has the details of the implementation. Outside of it, it doesn't, right? So the activity that's going to be using this doesn't know how the data is stored. Does that make sense? But we know. So in terms of populating that list now, right? So we want to add some products in. So I'm going to say product add, and we're going to say maybe new product. And if I think about, what we have here, so we have a few different products that show up on the layout. And so I'm going to kind of replicate that data first, right? So we've got a donut, right? And so in here, I'm going to say, well, let's create that donut. If we look at the constructor, what's the first argument we need to pass? We need to pass the ID, right? So what could I use as that ID? Well, maybe I just start it as, 1. Easy start. So ID 1, the name of it is donut.
Why are we using a string instead of just a straight up int for the ID?
Because long term, if I'm hooking this up to a database, more than likely it will need to be a string. If I'm hooking up to other data sources, it will more than likely need to be a string. You remember how we got into, for instance, MongoDB? You'll remember MongoDB does not use those auto increments.
Like I forget 1, 2, what 3. It's called. It's like its own little hash or something. Yeah, it's its own little hash. And it's kind of similar to what we call a GUID, or a globally unique identifier.
The reason we do that is there's a lot of problems with actually using the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Right? So in reality, this is not going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Does that make sense? So I'm future-proofing us on that front.
Okay.
Because a string will work for all the things that we do in the future. An integer actually most of the time is not sufficient. So, description. I'm actually going to pull over the values from strings. Yes, I'm aware that usually we want to translate stuff, but when we're working for let's say databases, what's going to be happening is that this data actually doesn't come from our app, and because this data doesn't come from our app, we won't be able to store it in strings XML. So I'm going to actually bring the data over here because basically, I'm not going to extract these strings. Does that make sense? The other part of this is this class has no connection to the Android APIs, and I don't want it to. Okay, so I've got my name, my ID, my name, my description. What's the next thing I need in here? Price. All right, what's the price of our donuts? Anybody?
$3.99.
Okay, $3.99. $3.99F. Okay, and so here I am kind of violating a little bit because I am going to say r dot drawable dot donut circle. Okay, so that's our first product. So we've got ID, name, description, and the image. Now, you remember we kind of added those annotations. So, and I mentioned that would throw an error if we wrote things in here. So, for instance, you can see if I put the number 3, you see how that shows up in red?
Yeah.
And it says expected resource type of drawable. Or if I do r dot color dot purple 200, that still is an integer, but it's not a drawable resource. So it should be giving us an error there, which it may or may not be, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, I'm going to go back to what we had there originally, which is the drawable r.id.donut circle. So, but that was what that was about, is kind of giving you errors as we get into here. Next thing we want is, let's see, what was on our layout. Our ice cream sandwich would be the next one. So that's 2, ice cream sandwich. And I'm going to pull in the string that we have here. Okay. And then the drawable is ice cream circle. That's the one I want. All right. What's the price of our ice cream sandwich? Or Klondike bar?
$2.50.
$2.50. Okay.
Must be buying those at the Ranken cafeteria then.
Times are tough.
And then the last one we have is the froyo. And I'll pull in the description for that. How much is our froyo?
$8.
Okay, $8 for a froyo. That sounds about right. So basically, I'm using the constructor to populate this data, so we have some test data to work with.
Hold on, wait a minute. Is that self-serve? I got to serve myself that froyo?
Yeah.
Yeah, I ain't paying $8 for that.
All right, $7.
I think I'd be scooping it.
Okay, $9.
I should stop before it goes up any higher.
All right, so that's what I'm going to do in terms of setting up the data. In terms of get all, that actually now is pretty easy to implement, because all I'm going to do is just say return products. That's my whole method there. Just say return everything that we have. Next question, in terms of getting it by ID, what should I do here? How can I implement this method? What tools can I use?
We can just loop through them, I guess.
Okay.
Just already.
I could loop through them. What kind of loop should I use?
A glorious for loop.
A what?
For loop.
For loop sounds good. Should I use a for each loop, or should I use a counted loop?
Counted.
Okay, so let's do a counted loop. So int I is equal to 0. I is less than products dot length. Actually, it would be dot size, because we have a list. And then plus I. All right. Okay. So we can loop through the products. What else? I'm probably, I'm looking for a product by ID, right? So I probably want an if statement in here. Say, well, is this the product we're looking for? Well, what product are we looking at? We're looking at products sub I, and we want to check that, check if the ID is the same. Now, a lot of times I keep seeing students do this. Get ID is equal to ID. What's the problem here?
Get ID is not a string.
Well, get ID is it returns a string.
Oh, maybe I was thinking of a different.
Yeah. So you'd only do comparison like this with primitive types. If you have reference types, which a string is, don't compare them with that. You may perhaps get lucky in some cases with that equality because of the simple examples that we're doing. So, if you're using string constants everywhere, there's kind of some magic that happens that means that may succeed where it shouldn't. But you really don't want to compare strings that way. So the way to remember to compare strings is you want to do dot equals and compare them that way. And also worth noting, I can't do sub-I because it's a list and not an array. So I can't use the array operator. I need to use get.
Yeah, also in line 35, should that just be list or array list?
That should be list.
What's the reason for that?
That's future-proofing us. So right now it is an array list. Right now we're storing the data here just in memory, right? And so we know in this case that it's an array list, but in the future, if I were to say pull this from someplace online or from a database, it's very likely that I won't get that back as an array list. Does that make sense?
Okay, I get it.
Right now it's possible that you could return it as array list. In the future, that won't be an option. So you don't want to make your other code depend on the fact that this is an array list. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You think we could take a break at 1:45?
That sounds pretty good. So that's about 3 minutes away.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we can say let's loop through that. If the array is equals, and remember we need to use the dot equals method for that, well then we know we found the product that we're looking for. So here I can then say return products get I. And finally, if I don't find the product, then I might say let's return null.
Just a general question about loops.
Yep.
It would be an if and then an else, and then you return null. Would that be the same? Less efficient?
No, it would absolutely not be the same. It would be completely different.
Okay.
So if you were to write this, what you're talking about, don't copy this. If you were to return this, if you were to write it this way, your program is completely broken. Because what this will do, you see you're doing an if statement, it will go to the first item in the list and determine if that matches, if that has the same ID. If it's got the same ID, it'll return that object. Otherwise, it's going to return null. So if you write it this way, we'll only ever look at the first item in the list.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
Don't do that. Yeah. Don't conflate. Don't conflate this being the same as, an else.
I should know better. I should know that.
Yeah. There are a lot of cases like this where you won't have an else statement and you shouldn't, right? So the only thing that we can do is we can say, if the IDs match, we found it, we're done. But if the ID doesn't match, we just need to keep looking. We don't know anything. We can't do anything in the else case. So this is all we need to do in terms of the data source today. Is the code that we have here. Is just implementing the constructor and those two methods. We'll probably come back to it at a later point in time because there will be things, in a more full fleshed out application. Absolutely, there's more things you need to add. But this is kind of our start to basically what we call the mocking out a database, right? We don't have a database yet, so we're creating a fake version of that database. So let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break. If you have issues, stick around and we'll try to resolve them. But otherwise, if you're all good, you're all caught up, go ahead and take a 15-minute break and we'll come back at 2 to resume.
No.
So we just got done making the product class, making the product data source class. The product class is absolutely we have to have that. The product data source is really it's an optional thing. I would ask, and I'm probably going to put this on the rubric for the next test, that you do make this class, this data source class, because it will make your life easier kind of going forward, as well as just with some of the things that you have to deal with getting the data between different screens. So I would ask that you make a data source class like this to hold your data. The other thing we can kind of realize with that, now with this separation, we can easily unit test both the product and the product data source class because they really have no connection to our activities. Does that make sense? So that's kind of our setup there. So just with those two things, we've set up the data. Okay, so that's just holding the data. The next thing we want to do is get the data on screen, right? So if we think about that, usually the next thing I do is kind of mock it up in Balsamic to kind of figure out where I want to place the data and how I want to show the data. So I'm going to add quickly just a rectangle.
Are we just watching?
Yeah, you can just watch this part.
Do it?
You can just watch this part. You don't need to code along with this mock-up. Because I think most of you have already sent me kind of your mock-ups as to what you're doing with your applications. So in here, if we think about, the data that I have, right, I want to place for the ID, the name, the price, and the image. I'm not actually going to show the ID to the user. That's just for us internally to be able to know which product we're referring to. So I might add a rectangle to start with. I might add an image in here to refer to the product that we're working with. And so if I kind of follow the layout that's already started, it kind of was an image on the left and then some text on the right. So I think I'm going to kind of follow that pattern. So what we're going for is kind of a layout that looks like this. And maybe the price underneath. Okay, so just kind of a quick mock-up thinking about where we're going to put the things. Any questions? Does that kind of make sense, what I'm doing there?
Yeah, we're just trying to get an idea what it's going to look like.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going for. Okay, so I need to actually make this layout as a separate file. This is where this needs to be a separate file. And so I'm going to go into layout. I'm going to say new layout resource. And there is a naming convention for this. So they should start with the word item underscore and then the name of the item that we're showing, right? So for instance, here we're showing products, right? So the convention, and this is what I am going to ask you to follow. This is going to be part of the expectations, is I'm going to call that item underscore product, right? So from that, can you guess what I would call it if, say, it was an employee that I was doing a layout for? What would I call that layout?
Activity employee.
Nope. I'll call it item employee.
Item employee, yeah.
So item
You'd still
employee.
call it an item.
This is an item, right? So we'll have ones that start with activity. We'll have ones that start with content. And now we're also going to have ones that start with item. Okay. So this represents a single item. And so I will say that the designer is not particularly helpful when it comes to designing items, ironically. It's not because this is like not the Google recommended way to do it. It's just they don't really have support for this. So what I really would like is just to be able to, I think, can I? Oh, no, I can. There we go. So really what I want to do, and I think this was added recently because I don't remember this used to be in there. So you can kind of resize the view to be roughly what you want it to be to reflect kind of the size of what it's going to be. You'll also notice that I turned off the system UI because it's not relevant here. I'm not designing an entire screen. I'm just designing part of a screen. So that's why I don't really care about seeing that.
Do you want us to have a specific, like when you're pulling it up and down, at the bottom right of the item? I didn't know if you wanted us to have a specific setting.
Nope. The setting that you put it at doesn't matter. Just make it kind of a rectangle here that's wider than it is tall. That's all. So if it looks roughly like my screen, it doesn't need to be exactly the same size as my screen. Just that it has that shape. Okay, so thinking about what I need in here, I want an image view, so I'm going to drag that in, and I'm going to use maybe the froyo as my icon here, my placeholder, and then I just need 3 text views. So text view, text view, text view. And I think I might actually make this smaller because the text is showing up really, really small. So that gives me at least some indication that I'm probably too zoomed out. Anyway, okay, so the image here, I want to change, before I do all my anchors, I want to make sure I'm at 8. And I might want to make sure that I have the right IDs. So this would be, maybe I just call this product. This would be product image or item product image.
So this is kind of like a blueprint, what we're making here.
Yes, basically. It is sort of a blueprint. I shared in the way I resized it is the corner down here. You can kind of see the 2 slashes. So I dragged that handle to resize the layout. So I'm going to do that, and then so this would be item product name. This would be item product description. And the reason I'm using long names like this and not just calling it like image, name, description, etc., is because these IDs do have to be unique throughout your entire application. So I can't use the same ID in 2 different places. So if I just said description, I'm very likely to have a collision where 2 different controls have the same ID, and then that would be a problem. So that's why I'm giving them what seems like pretty long names, like item, product, price, etc.
I got this weird problem. I can't change the ID name. It's like it's locked. What will cause that?
I'm not entirely sure. It may be you might try deleting the control and adding it back in.
I can't do that either.
Okay. Then maybe delete the layout and recreate it. Honestly, because it's probably a problem with the layout. So now that I've given those all IDs, I'm going to go ahead and add some constraints. So this I'm going to constrain to the top left and bottom edges. I'm going to constrain this text view. Left side here, right side to the edge of the screen. Same with description, left side to the image, right side to the edge of the screen. Left side to the image, right side to the edge of the screen. Let me collapse that so I can zoom in a little bit. And so then the text views, I basically want these to be kind of all vertically arranged. So I'm going to pick the 3 text views. And you'll remember earlier in the course I kind of mentioned that you can use chains if I want something like this where it's vertically distributed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select those 3. I'm going to right click. And the way I selected those 3, I was holding Control. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to go into chains, and I'm going to say create a vertical chain. Okay, so that vertical chain is going to space them out evenly on the layout. Next thing I need to do, I still need to set the width and height of these different elements. So, for instance, on the image here, I'm going to give that a height of. Actually, I want to do one thing before I do that. I want to try and give it a. Can I do that? Where is it? Why am I not getting my corner? I'm going to give it a height and width of, there we go. So I'm going to give it a height and width of, no, I want the width to be wrap content. I want the height to be, the height I want it to be as tall as it can be. So the height is going to be 0dp, the width is wrap content. Any questions so far about setting up this layout or how those chains work?
Trying to catch up.
Okay. Anybody else?
Would there be a way to attach the top and bottom of the chain to the top and bottom of the image? Like if we were to do something like that?
I don't believe so. I don't think so. There are things that you can do with, for instance, setting some rules in, and so you could use those or guidelines. You can use some guidelines to do something similar. I think, though, in the end I don't think you'll actually need to do what you're thinking you're going to need to do.
Okay.
Because we'll basically control it by the height of this whole item itself is going to take care of the part that you're thinking of, I believe.
What are your constraints on the image and the chain?
So the image is left, top, and bottom.
Okay.
And the chains, I constrained them, their left side to the right side of the image, and I constrained their right side, all of them, to the right side of the screen.
Okay, and I see you got wrap content on each of those.
Yeah, so pretty much everything is wrap content right now. That's one of the things I want to change, is change those different sizes. So going back to the image, you'll see that I set the width to wrap content and the height to 0dp. Does everybody have that?
Yep.
So it's going to be as wide as the image, but as tall as the screen. And it's still respecting the size of the image, which is good. What I'm going to do now, there's a little corner that appears. Everybody see this corner on the constraint widget where my mouse cursor is?
Yeah.
You should see that appear. I'm going to click on that. And what it's done is it's just added a ratio constraint. You can see it down here in the bottom left. And so what that does is it constrains what the kind of the relative size between the width and the height. So because it's set to 1:1, it says that the width should be the same as the height. So I can use that, now that I've got that constraint on there, if I were to say set the width up to match constraints, it's now going to scale the image up but keep it square.
How did you do that again, the ratio?
So I click the little corner here. but that corner didn't appear until, like I had set one of those things to match constraints in order for it to appear. If they were both wrap content, that corner didn't appear.
Okay. One more thing. The text views. What are those set at?
So the text views right now, they're just wrap content in both dimensions. What I want to do for the text views, and I want to change all of their widths to match constraint. So their height are going to stay as the heights are going to stay as wrap content, but I'm going to change their widths to match constraint. So at this point, if you resize the layout and kind of play around with it at different sizes, you'll start to see how this behaves. And so basically where we're going to try and get it to end up is something closer to, this, where it's much wider than it is tall. So.
All right, I think I'm caught up now. Thanks.
Okay. So things I may want to do, I might want to quickly fix the text that's showing up in these different controls. So for instance, right now it says text view on each of those three. So I'm going to change that to be product name, and I'm putting this in the designer property instead of the regular property. Product name, product description, and product price. I also want to go ahead and change some of the relative text sizes and font sizes. So for instance, we've got this, the name, I might want that to be in bold and maybe be a little bit bigger. So I might say 20 SP here, or something thereabouts. Product price, product description, I probably will just leave as is, and we'll figure out if that's going to work or not. Actually, 20 SP looks kind of big. Maybe just 20 is probably fine. 20 is probably fine for what we're doing. And then maybe for the price, maybe we change the text color to teal 200. There we go. So we've got a little bit of styling going on there. So again, this is bold and 20 SP, no change for the description, and I've just made the price teal. Okay, so the nice thing here is, because we're working with the designer, you really have a lot of flexibility to how you set up the item layouts. Does that make sense? Because you've got a full layout for you. Layout here. So we can make the individual items look any way we want to. Which is one of the great strengths of this RecyclerView control, is that we can use a layout to design the individual items. Okay. Anybody have anything left to ask or whatnot on this before we go to the next piece?
You got 8 DP on all those text views, right?
Well, you said 8? Oh, as far as the margins, yeah.
Yeah, right, on the left side.
Yeah. So I've got an 8 DP margin between all the individual pieces.
I miss VS Code. I'll just say it.
Yeah. So we've got that, and what I want to do now that I've got that in place, I'm going to go back to the layout where this is actually going to show, which would be activity main. the reason mine's big is I just resized it and I made it much smaller and then I zoomed in. So I just made this smaller using the handle and then zoomed in on it using control and mouse wheel. So I'm going to go over to the activity main layout. And so right now we have all of these views here. You see all that? Okay. I'm going to drag, select all that, and delete it. It's gone. So the only thing you have left is the FAB.
Oh, I felt so sad.
Sorry. So the thing we're going to add in here now, we're going to actually add the recycler view. In fact, you can kind of see that it's in common. All right, so we're going to drag the recycler view in. That's actually already, as soon as we dragged it in, it took care of, if you needed an update to your Gradle, it's already done that. So if I were to look at my Gradle, it used to be historically that you had to add the recycler view in here manually. Nowadays, it's added automatically. All you have to do is drag it in to the designer. And I believe it's part of this material, com.google.android material package, if I remember right. But that gets added automatically. You don't have to do anything about that, because you used to have to update your Gradle just to do that. Okay, so the recycler view's in. We just need to add some constraints real quick. Boop, boop, boop. I'm just going to add it as 0 to all 4 sides. That's it. And I also want to make sure it's set to, for its width and height, it's going to be 0 dp and 0 dp. So I just want my recycler view to fill up the entire screen. You also want to make sure that you give it a ID. So here I'm going to give it the ID of product list. And so that's all we need to do for main activity. Any questions? Now, one thing I might note, if you've already done a layout, and I didn't do this here, but if I had a bunch of layout and stuff that I wanted to keep, one of the things you could have done is copied from here, and you could have actually selected all those, copied, and pasted it over to this other item layout. So on your projects that you're already working on, that's what I would recommend, is go to wherever you're showing the list right now, copy those controls over to the item layout when you make it. Cool. All right, is everybody caught up with the main activity change?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so we've got those things in place. If I run the application right now, you'll still just see a blank screen. Because we haven't put in any of the logic to actually populate that recycler view yet, or to tell it about the item layout. So right now you can see I've just got an empty layout. So the next few steps, basically you're not going to see anything on the screen until we fix all of them. Okay? So just be aware of that. And as you're building your projects, you do have to remember all of these steps in order to get it to actually show up properly. All right, so I'm going to go into the Droid Cafe folder here, and I'm going to create another class. So we've created the product and product data source class. I need to create another 2 classes. So the next class we're going to create is product Viewholder. Okay, so I'm going to create a class called Product Viewholder. That class will extend extends RecyclerView dot Viewholder. Okay, so it needs to extend RecyclerView dot Viewholder. So that will show up in red because we haven't implemented it yet. If I do Alt-Enter, it will give me a suggestion here. It says create constructor matching super. Clicking that here will give me this. Okay. So what we're getting in here as the argument, basically this is the root or the layout of our individual items. So in this view holder, basically we've got the class, you've got the constructor. Just like when we usually create classes, one of the first things we have to do is add fields. So what we're going to add in here is not a place to store the data, but a place to store all the controls that are on our layout. Okay? So if we think about what's on our item layout, right? How many controls do we have here? Well, we have 4, right? So we have the image, we have the name, we have the description, and the price. So I'm going to add a place to store all of those things in the view holder. So in here, we're going to add an image view. And so I'm just going to call that image. Names can be short here because they don't have to be global unique. I'm going to add a text view for the name, private text view for the description, another text view for the price. And actually, I misspoke. I'm going to make all of these public.
Only name is showing up in purple.
Yeah.
Why?
Probably because there's something special about it. I'm not sure why. But that's what I'm going to put in the product view holder, is a place to store those different controls. The other thing I commonly want to store is the root. Reason being, if I remember right, there's not a getter for this. Oh, no, there is. What access modifier is that one? Oh, I don't want this one public. Okay. Yeah. So that's all I need to add is just implement the constructor, doing the Alt-Enter thing, and I'm just going to add these fields and make them public. That's it. And the reason I'm making these public is, normally when you create classes, like we created this product class, we want encapsulation and we want to hide details. With the view holder, we honestly don't really care about encapsulation, to be honest, because this is kind of basically a throwaway class. It's a very short class that you have to write just to hold some data, and all of the logic for this is really going to be elsewhere. Okay. Everybody got the view holder in place?
Yep.
I'm going to just post this on Discord as a reminder.
I really thought you were about to delete it all.
No. This is the part that I do differently. If you look at any tutorial on how to use the recycler view, they will make these private and then put some additional logic in the constructor. I have a reason that I don't do that, and so that will maybe make sense as we go on. But this is where I'm going to write it, and I think that this is actually better than what most people will tell you to do. So that's how I'm going to write my view holder. And so the next thing I need to do, and the most important thing there is it just needs to extend RecyclerView Viewholder. The next thing I want to do is create another class. And so this is going to be the product list adapter. And so what this is going to do, this is where the grunt, this is where the main part of the code that we're writing for the RecyclerView goes. So in here, I'm going to say that this product list adapter, it's going to extend RecyclerView dot adapter. And you'll notice that adapter is genericized. So the thing it needs to take is a reference to a Viewholder class. So it's going to reference that product Viewholder. And so this is one of the reasons I always create my Viewholder first, is so that I then have it here. You basically can't write this class until you have a Viewholder class. Okay. So once you get that in there, so extends RecyclerView.adapter product Viewholder, I'm going to hit, we're going to start implementing the individual methods there. So I'm not actually going to hit Alt Enter with this because I want to do this a little bit more manually, because the way that it generates the code is not really the way that I want it. So internally, in terms of fields, I'm going to have a list of products. And you'll notice here I'm doing list, I'm not doing array list. That's important, okay? So I've got list, and I'm just going to call it items. Okay? Not calling it products, I'm just calling it items. Okay. Next thing I want to do is I need a constructor, public product list adapter. And so that constructor takes two things. It's going to take a context, and it's going to take the list of products. So list product products, or items, sorry, items. Okay. So in terms of what I need to do in the constructor, first of all, I'm going to save the items. This.items is equal to items. Another thing I need to do in the constructor to kind of prepare for what's coming, I need an inflator. I think this is layout inflator. Yeah, inflator. And in here, I'm going to say this dot inflator is equal to layout inflator from context. So a layout inflator is used to take a layout XML resource and turn it into actual views. So we'll need that here in a minute. So I've got my fields, I've got my constructor, and then there's a few methods I need to implement on the for this interface for the adapter. So the first one is get item count. We're going to override that method, and that method is going to return how many items there are. And so that one's easy. You just say return the size of the list. Now, oftentimes, one thing you'll need to do is occasionally you'll get a list that's null. So what I usually do for better, so that this doesn't crash, is I usually say if items is not null, return the size, otherwise return 0. That will help keep your program from crashing, because every once in a while you will run into the problem where your list is null. Okay. Everybody caught up?
Yep.
Okay. So get item count. That's that one. the next method we're going to implement is on create Viewholder. And so inside of on create Viewholder, this gets called every time the RecyclerView needs a new Viewholder, a new thing to be able to hold a data item. This is mostly just called a bunch of times when you initially set it up, and then won't be called very much from then on. So because it kind of creates all the view holders, all the views at the beginning, and then reuses them. So internally to here, this is where we're going to use the inflator that we set up. The reason we set it up in the constructor is because we only want to create that once, because it's a little bit costly to do. Otherwise down here it would be created many, many more times. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to now inflate the layout that we have. Now I want to check real quick in the documentation because there's a few things here that are easy to, a few details that are easy to forget. So we want to say inflate, pass the view group, and false. That's the flag I want. Okay. So inflator dot inflate, and then r.layout, and here's where I'm going to bring in that product layout that we created earlier. So r.layout item product. Next argument is the view group parent here that we've got pulled in. Last argument is false. In terms of implementing RecyclerView, this will always be false. That third argument will never be true. If you make it true, your application is likely to either behave oddly or crash, because it does expect that to be false. If you're doing other things with Android, there are other places where you might call that true, but in this particular case, in onCreate Viewholder, that will always be false. Okay? So that's our inflate, and then we need to save the result there. This is going to return a view. This is our item view, okay, which we're going to actually use to create our view holder. So here I want product view holder VH is equal to new product view holder, and I'm going to pass in that item view. Okay. There's some code we need to write here. Come back to that in a minute. And finally, we're going to return the view holder. So first we inflate the layout. We construct our view holder, and then what we're going to do in here is we're going to kind of grab the individual fields from the layout that we need. So this function is going to be, kind of basically tightly coupled to that layout. Does that make sense? So if you change this layout, you're going to have to change this function as well. All right. Everybody got that so far?
Yep.
Okay. So in here, you'll remember with the view holder, I added these 4 fields and I made them public. So here's where we're actually going to connect up to those. So in here, I want to say vh dot image is equal to item view dot find by ID, find view by ID, and so I'm going to look it up by layout. So r by ID. So r.id, this would be the item product image. vh.name is equal to item view dot find by ID, find view by ID, r.id dot item product name vh dot description is equal to item view dot find view by ID r dot ID dot item product description. VH dot price is equal to item view find view by ID r dot ID dot item product price. Okay. So we're using find view by ID to get each of the different controls that we put on that layout. And so kind of like, you know, when we're working with activities, onCrate is the only place where you want to call find view by ID. OnCrate Viewholder is the only place where you want to call find view by ID in these adapters. So we're getting pretty close to the end of this adapter. The last method I need to implement is onBind Viewholder. And which one do I need to implement? Let's see, there's a product viewholder, item position, list payload. I think it's this one. Check real quick. Yes, it takes 2 arguments. Got it. So onBind Viewholder, and it's the one that takes it's going to take a product viewholder plus a position. So this holder is one that's been previously created by onCrate Viewholder. So that's what we're getting passed in here is one we created previously. It might currently have data in it from some other item. So one of the things that means is we need to make sure that we clean it up, you know, set all the values in here and not leave data in for something old. That'll be pretty easy in this case, but just keep in mind that that's sometimes a problem, is that you sometimes end up with stale data from if you forget to update it. So we want to make sure that we're basically updating the holder. And here, this position, this refers to an index within our items list. Okay. So what I want to do first is I want to get the particular item that we're going to display. So here I'm going to say product item is equal to items.get position. So that'll give us the particular item that we're going to then bind the data up with. So this item, we're going to show its data in the view holder. Okay? And so now I just go through each of the views and update them with the relevant data. So for instance here, I'm going to say holder dot image dot set image resource, and there I'm going to use the item.get image res ID. Okay, so that's the image. Holder.name set text, and that's going to be item.get name. Holder dot description set text, and I want to set that to item dot get description, and then with the price I want to set text again, but in here, remember that price is stored as a float, so I need to actually format it before I can put it into there. so I can't put it in directly. So I might do string.format or something similar. And I could do it this way. You'll remember, though, earlier we kind of went over there's a tool that you can use to format currency, okay, which was pretty early in this course. Do you remember that there's a sort of currency formatter? And so I want to get that and use that here. I think that was number formatter. Or was it number format dot? Yeah, that's what I want. Number format dot get currency instance. And so I'm going to say this returns a number format. So, and maybe I'll just move it down a little bit. So this is going to be return a number format, price format is equal to number formatter, number format dot get currency instance. And so I'm going to use that price formatter to actually format the price. So format, price format, and this would be item dot get price. So using that currency instance, it'll end up actually formatting it in whatever the user's current locale is. So I might want to clarify that. So let's say I want it to specifically show up in US dollars. I might say locale US here when I ask for the currency format, and that will force it to be shown up as USD rather than whatever their local currency is. Any questions there?
Are you gonna post a video about this too?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got my recording going. So those are, in terms of implementing the recycler view, these are probably the two most important methods to understand. Is the onCrate viewholder as well as the onBind viewholder methods.
Yeah, I got a question about how you have things set up.
Yeah.
I notice maybe I'm not watching at the right time, but I don't think you're importing these classes. They just kind of show up. I got to do it as I go along.
Yeah. Let me go to settings and see if I can find it. There's an option in the editor which you can have it automatically do the imports for you most of the time. Unambiguous. There it is. So under Editor General Auto Import, let me get out of the search here. So Editor General Auto Import, you see that there's a little checkbox here.
You won't. Yeah, okay. Add unambiguous imports on the fly.
Yep, that's it. You just check that box.
Oh, okay. And if you use something and then you decide you don't want to use it, it just leaves it in there, right?
It still leaves it in there, so you'll have to go remove it. But what it does is it says if there's only one class with that name, then we'll just go and automatically import it. If there's two classes with that name, then you still have to manually import it. So for instance, date, because there's two date classes, or rectangle, things like that, where there's more than one or point, where there's more than one of that name.
Okay, it's just an extra line that would show up at the top. It's not like gonna wreck your program or.
No, yeah. If it didn't remove it, so for instance here I have number formatter in there, which I'm not using, I could just go ahead and remove it. Yeah, it's generally not a huge problem. And the fact of the matter is, if you have unused import like that, there is a button to fix that. I think it's under, is it under, where is it? It's either under code or, oh, there it is. So under code, if I have the file open, I can go to code, optimize imports, and it'll remove anything that I'm not using. So cleaning that up is pretty easy. Okay, so that's our adapter. So we've got our view holder and our adapter. Okay, so now that I've got those classes created, and we kind of go, if I go look at our list of things, right? So we saw the list of things that we need to, components we need to make this work. So far, we've gone through the data, remember, with the product and the product data source. We've added the recycler view to our activity. We've created a layout for the item. We haven't set up a layout manager yet, and we've started the adapter. We've created a class for it, but we haven't hooked things up yet. And we've created our view holder class. So, basically the last parts in here is to hook up connect all of the pieces together. So now that I've done all that, I'm going to go back to main activity. We can close everything else. Okay. So in main activity, we'll see that I already kind of have a list of items here. Everybody see that? Does anybody remember what's in that list?
All right, isn't?
Huh?
Oh, never mind. That's the older list. Never mind.
Yeah. Do you remember what's in this list in main activity?
Aren't they just the string names of the items?
Uh-huh.
So like it's just donut, ice cream sandwich.
But it's not the ones that are shown on screen. It's the ones I've added to my cart, right?
That's like our hello toast down there on.
Yeah.
Like our...
So I'm going to actually rename this one. I'm going to say right-click, refactor, rename. And to help keep this clear, I'm going to call this order items instead. So I'm going to rename it from items to order items. And so what I'm going to add in here, private product data source. And so maybe call this product data source. So we can add a place to store that, and product data source is equal to new product data source, right? So now I have a reference to my data source. And remember, in the constructor for product data source, that's where I'm constructing this list of products, right? So internally to there, as soon as I write this line of code, we're constructing the list. Cool?
Cool.
Okay. So let's now work with the recycler view. Okay. As usual, anytime I want to refer to a control in the UI, I need a reference to it. So I'm going to add private RecyclerView. This might be product, or maybe I'll just call this RecyclerView. Yeah, I'm just going to call that RecyclerView. So I've got a reference to my RecyclerView, and my RecyclerView, I'm going to say find view by ID, r.id .recycler. No, it's not RecyclerView. I called it product. I call it product list. There we go. Okay, so I get my RecyclerView. I next need to create an adapter. So in here, I'm going to say, let's create a new adapter. Product list adapter. Adapter is equal to new product list adapter. It needs a context and the list of products. And so I'm going to get that from the data source .getAll. And sometimes I may want to keep around that list. So you may want to say, keep that list up here. If I want to say private product list or list product. So product list, I might want to keep that around. And so I would say product list is equal to there, get all. So I get the list of products. I then wrap an adapter around that. And then I can start configuring the RecyclerView. So RecyclerView.set layout manager. Right now we're going to use a linear layout manager. So I'm just going to say new linear layout manager. It needs a context. So I'm going to pass this. And I want to give it a direction, which is, yes, okay. So linear layout manager dot vertical. And then there's a Boolean to say if you want it to be top to bottom or bottom to top. So you have the reverse layout. So we don't want to reverse it. We want to have it going the normal direction. So false. So I'm going to make it linear, and I'm not going to reverse it. So the first product's going to be at the top.
Generally, it'll always be like this. I mean, for most apps that we're building.
What do you mean? In terms of vertical or?
Yeah, the vertical and the false, like a reverse layout.
Yes, a lot of times it will be false. I will say that there is some very common cases, though, where you want it to be true. One of those cases is if you're building a chat application. Usually I want the messages reversed. I may want the newest messages up the top. Or if you're doing anything with social media, usually you want the newest post in your feed up at the top. So oftentimes with social media, you usually going to say true there with social media apps. Whereas if you're working with things like, if I'm working with an e-commerce store, I'm probably going to say false. I'm probably going to have it ascending. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it.
Or if I'm doing lists of transactions, I want my newest transactions up at the top. So there are actually a lot of cases where that might be true. RecyclerView.setAdapter is the next thing I need to do, and then I'm just going to provide it the adapter that we had created. So in terms of RecyclerView, you call setLayoutManager and then setAdapter. Okay, everybody got this so far? So if I've played my cards right, I should be able to run the application and see something. There's still a bug I have to resolve, and you can see it right away in that my icons are huge, are enormous. Yep. So one of the things that this is a bug that basically everybody runs into, and is actually very easy to forget about how to fix it. So absolutely, please take a note of how I'm going to address this problem. So what it's doing right now, every item is taking up the entire height of a screen. So if you look at this, you notice peculiarly that the image is the entire height of a screen. This image is the entire height of the screen. The entire height of a screen. Everybody see that?
Yeah.
So this is the hallmark, and you're going to get this pretty much every time you use a Recycler View, unless you remember to do one thing. So the reason that this is happening is because of how I set up my product layout. Okay? Because of how I set up my product layout. So let's look at Constraint Layout. Notice what the width and height of this Constraint Layout is. See, it's match parent.
Yeah.
So match parent says take up the entire parent's width or the entire parent's height. So the reason that it's this tall is because we set match parent on the height. So the way you fix that, you just change the layout height on the layout height on the layout container here, the constraint layout. We're going to set that to wrap content, and it will be fixed.
Okay, that's pretty nice.
So write that down, because you're going to be looking at I guarantee you that several of you will be looking that up later. Because every time I teach this, that's a problem that people have, is they forget to set their height to wrap content, because it's very easy to forget.
It didn't work.
Didn't work?
Yeah, I don't know where the error is. I mean, we've done so many things.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell. It's just blank.
It's just blank?
Yeah.
Okay. That means that something here is missing.
My product list up at the top is grayed out. What would be on line 21 for you there?
Then you're missing line 35.
Oh, yeah, I am.
That would be why. So that means that you're giving the adapter null as the list. So you can see, hey, we've got items showing up. They actually look pretty nice. If I wanted to add some more items just to kind of see how it behaves, test it a little bit more, I could just go into product source and maybe duplicate this so I have 6 items instead of 3. And we should see there, hey, I get a nice scroll view behavior with that. I can kind of turn it turn it sideways. We can test it in the landscape layout, and it's still pretty good. So that's a great start. Now I might want to quickly change these IDs just so they're separate. 1, 5, and 6. So, Paul, you got your problem fixed?
Yeah, but it crashes when I do landscape. I've got to, I think one of our homeworks a while back was to do the landscape view for this, and something's not playing nice.
Okay.
I don't know.
I don't have a landscape view here. So if you have a landscape view, you might just try... Oh, if you have a landscape view, I know exactly what it is. Remember how we added the product list and we deleted everything else? Answer is that you probably still have Answer is you probably still have your old your landscape version is still probably has all of those old controls. You probably need to update it. So you just need to delete everything except the FAB and add back in the RecyclerView. Now, Java lang null pointer attempt to read field Android view on a null object reference. Okay, so that's the error you're getting, Troy. My guess as to what you're getting is probably, Troy, what you're getting is probably in the adapter. And I'm going to guess that you're not passing, it's probably one of these two lines that it's at fault, 33 or 34. Is when you're constructing the view holder, perhaps you're not passing the item view through. Or the item's not getting properly created. Layout's not getting inflated.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think I have all that right, but
okay. It's probably that, and if it's not one of those two lines, then just make sure that your constructor is actually calling the super constructor with the item view argument. But that would be my suspicion. Is that it's one of those two lines at fault. Because basically it's telling you, hey, I got null for that item view. Anything else? Anybody else having any issues at this point?
Somehow I'm returning the name and the description. I'm just hunting for that, but I think I got that on my own.
Okay.
Paul, are you using the emulator still?
Yeah.
Like I said, try it on your physical device too, man. I've been using the one, and it just works.
Okay.
One thing I would say, I want to try this real quick, kind of talking about in that same vein. I'm going to try this on the 10-inch tablet. And so once this gets up and running, constraint layout cannot be, so that's your on create on line 34. So in your, Jonathan's pointing you to your main activity. I'm going to guess that your ID here is maybe not the right ID. Go check your main activity layout. Make sure that product list is the ID of the RecyclerView, not the ID of the constraint layout, which looks like what it is. It looks like your product list, you've set that as the ID of the layout, not the RecyclerView. Close all that. There we go. So we'll see on the tablet, everything's really, really small. And we're really not doing a good job of using up all the space. Okay. And you may see this on the 7-inch tablet. It's absolutely more noticeable on a 10-inch tablet, as you can see. So oftentimes what we do with tablets is that we're going to arrange these items in a grid instead of arranging them just in a line. You're very with me on that?
So we're going to do like a side by side compared to...
Yeah, side by side. So we'll use more than one column rather than just using one column.
That'll look clean.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do to make that happen, I'm just going to change this line here that sets up the layout manager and comment out the line that I already have. I'm going to say RecyclerView dot set layout manager. And instead of giving it a linear layout manager, I'm going to give it a new grid layout manager. And so that grid layout manager still needs a context. And then it needs, like, how many rows and columns do you want? So, actually, no, I think it's just the number of rows, the number of columns. So if I want it to be maybe 2 by 2 wide, then I believe all I've got to set there, if I remember right, is just 2. There we go. So if you set 2, then we get 2 columns. If I say set 3, then I get 3 columns.
How did you double those up?
What do you mean double those up? I went to the product data source and just duplicated.
Oh, okay. I
just
see
duplicated the data there in the product data source. So basically, if you want to have it in columns like that, you just use a grid layout manager instead of a linear layout manager.
Can you do span 2 again? Because on my physical tablet, when I'm doing the grid layout, it's got this weird bug where like the first 2 are fine, and then the second 2 are smaller.
Okay.
The third 2 go back to being normal. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I think I know why. And so let me try it actually on a 7-inch tablet.
Yeah, it didn't look like I could see it on yours.
Instead of the 10-inch. I think I'm gonna even if I can't recreate it here, I think I know I think I know what the problem is, because it's kind of a common sort of thing. Okay, I'm not getting it here, but I think I know what it is.
I could see it like right there. Your view right there is what mine looks like.
Was in landscape or portrait?
It's portrait.
Portrait. Okay, where?
You can see donut on the right side is smaller.
Oh, yes, these. Okay, so there is a weird kind of bug with how things work especially when you get into the grid view. And it's actually the same problem that we had earlier. It's just in the horizontal direction. So if you go back to the item layout, you remember how we had to change the height to wrap content? Do you remember that?
Yep.
Well, to get this into a grid, notice that I'm still setting it as match parent as the width. That's the problem. So if I'm putting this in a grid, I can't have either of those be match parent. So in order for this to work, I could say, well, let's try wrap content, but then it collapses to nothing. You see that? So what I actually end up needing to do to make this work in a grid is I actually have to set a fixed width on there. So for instance, if I set 200 dp, that's wider than I need it to be. Oh, and did I think I set it on the wrong thing. Or I didn't confirm it. 200 dp, enter. Okay. Just checking that I didn't set that on the wrong one. 200 dp. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so it's still doing that behavior for the width. I think I may need to set the height too. So let's say the width is 200 and the height is 100 dp. And I need to hit enter on that. I didn't hit enter, so it didn't save. 200 by 100. There we go. Except that things are kind of falling off, as you can see the text, because of the descriptions being what they are, it's falling off. So I think I need to give this maybe 150 as the height. And maybe do 300 by 150. So this kind of requires a little bit of playing around to get the numbers right. But basically what I end up having to do is giving them usually a fixed dimension.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's not really built-in capability, right? You just have to finesse it a little bit.
Yeah, for this you usually have to finesse it a little bit to get the item dimensions correct. So I think, Jonathan, the problem that you're having where they're different sizes is probably that same thing, where one of them is bigger than the rest. So that's usually something I end up having to do to get it to make it work in a grid layout, is I kind of have to give the layout a fixed size. If I then run this on, say, the tablet, we can see how that lays out. And so, okay, that's pretty good for the landscape. It's landscape, it's okay, but there's a lot of wasted space. I think that maybe what happens if I go back to match parent for the width on that? Is it going to do it evenly? Okay, yeah, it works. So it's just a matter of the height needed to be a fixed number instead of wrap content.
Oh, cool. I don't know how much more content we got. Will we have time to take another break, or do you think we should?
I think we should take another break here in a second.
Okay.
And just kind of think about what's left. So you can see what's happening there. Right, so it kind of works. I just had to kind of configure the right height. Okay. One of the things that you want to then go back and check is, let's say we try to run this on the Nexus S, right? So we've told it to be a grid layout with 2 columns. Look what's happening on the Nexus S now.
So we basically took out our phone version and gave it a tablet version only.
Yeah. So my problem is I'm trying to always give it 2 columns. And so there's not enough space on a smaller device for 2 columns. There is on a bigger device, but there isn't on smaller devices. So let's say I go back to just changing it to 1 here. Well, that works, right? So if I have it 1 by 1, it's going to work on a smaller device like this. But I'm not gonna. But now it's 1 on every device.
So do we have to put like an if statement in there?
That would be one way to solve it. You could put an if statement in there and say, well, if the screen is so wide or such, then use a different number. What I want to show you, though, is a different way to solve this problem. We've already kind of talked about layout variants. I'm going to use a resource to solve this problem instead of an if statement. So we'll do that when we come back from break. Okay.
All right.
So we'll talk about how to change that, and we can basically change that to be, say, 1, 2, or 3 based on the size of the screen. So let's take a break, call it a 15-minute break, and come back at 3:37.
You said 3 what?
3:37.
Okay, cool.
Anybody else having any difficulties while we're here on break?
For once, no.
Okay. I hope you can see, like, why I said this. Like, this requires like 300 lines of code to do this. Yesterday.
Yeah, it's not too bad. I don't think I'd be able to generate it myself, though.
Yeah. It's
like,
not. Yeah, it's not a. It's not hard code, right? None of this stuff is like hard algorithmic stuff. But it's just there's a lot of wires that you have to get in the right place for it to work. Oh, okay. Yeah, that would do it. That would do it. So you had return null at the end. That makes sense. Okay. Everybody back?
Yep.
Yep.
So what we were kind of looking at before we went to break, we were talking about using this grid layout and scaling it to a different number of columns. And so what I wanted to look at is, well, how can I change this so that it's, maybe one column on smaller devices, two columns on medium-sized devices, and then three on much larger sized devices. So, one of the ways I think, Zach, you'd suggested maybe using an if statement here, which is oftentimes, honestly, a lot of people, that's the thing that they gravitate towards. Like, hey, I'm going to write an if statement too. The reality is there's a much, much easier way and a way that is much better. Because you can write the if statements, you'll have a whole lot of problem. If you write it as an if statement, you'll have a whole lot of problems that you don't even know exist because of how Android decides to change and adjust sizes as the application is running. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use a tool which we haven't really covered yet. It's touched on later in lesson 5, although not really very deeply. And oddly enough, I have not seen it in any tutorial that teaches you how to work with a RecyclerView, which I'm really surprised by. But there is a tool in here that will solve this problem. Okay? So, and it's really not that hard. If I go to project, you'll remember we've kind of have some files already in this values folder. Remember there's the colors file, there's a strings file. So values is kind of a holder for these groups of different value files, things that you want to store. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new file to the values folder, a new values resource folder, new values resource file. And what I'm going to call this is I'm going to call this dimens.xml. DIMEAENS. Dimens. I'm going to go ahead and add that. So dimens short for dimensions. So I can use this resource file to have some kind of dimensions that I store, and then I can change those basically dynamically based on the screen size. You can kind of think of it a little bit like a media query. So does everybody have that dimens file created?
Yes.
Okay. So internally to this dimens, I'm going to add a new tag, and I'm going to add an integer. And so this integer will be grid columns. And in this file, I'm just going to set it to 1. Thing to remember with all of these resource files, the default file is what you're doing for generally the smallest device. And so you Your variations are for devices that are larger. So for the smallest device, I want 1 column. Also in here, I'm going to specify some other things which we put in. So for instance, I'm going to add a dimen tag, and this is going to be the item height. And so if you remember, we set in the item layout, I had set this in item product, I'd set the height of it to 150 dp, right? But that's one of those. This is one of those things I really don't want to hard code into my layout where I can avoid it. I want to have it kind of configurable. So I'm going to put in the item height here as 150 dp. So I have grid columns as 1, item height is 150. Okay, so far?
Yep.
Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create actually a few variations of this file. So similar to how we had like a tablet, like a tablet variation and a landscape variation and a portrait variation of the layouts, I can do that with this dimens file. In fact, you can do this with any resource file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on values again, and I'm going to say new values resource file. Again, I'm going to call it dimens. The difference is I'm going to add a qualifier here. So the qualifier I'm adding is screen width. So I'm going to add a screen width qualifier using that right arrow. And the qualifier is 300. Or no, 600. 600. So I'm going to say roughly, I think these items fit well into about 300 dp of space. So if I've got 600 dp of space or more, I can probably fit 2. So I'm going to make another file with a screen width qualifier, screen width, not smallest screen width, just screen width, and set that to 600. All right, so now I have another file here. I'm going to put the same properties, but I'm going to change one of them. So here I'm going to say that the grid columns is 2 in my 600 dp file. I'm going to create a third one. So new values resource file. Again, call it dimens. And this one's again screen width, but this time I'm going to say 900. And so in my 900 one, I'm going to say I'm going to have 3 grid columns. So by default, I have 1 grid column. If I have 600 dp of width, then I'm going to have 2 grid columns. If I have 900 dp, then I'm going to have 3 grid columns. All right, everybody got that? Kind of tracking with me here?
Yep.
So by creating these different variations, it will automatically pick the right number. And so all I've got to do now is go back to the places where those are used. So for instance, the height, rather than specifically setting the height here in item product, I'm going to point that at dimen item height. So it's going to use whatever values over in that file rather than hard coding the 150 dp. So that way, if I wanted to have them different heights on different screens, I can do that now. So that's all I need to do with the layout is just change the height. So I've got match parent for the width, item height for the height, and I'm going to go back to main activity, and where I've just got this 1 here, or 2 or 3 or whatever you have there, I'm going to say get. Actually, let me just put this on a separate file, separate line. So int grid columns is equal to get resources dot get integer. And then I'm going to say r dot integer dot grid columns. and I'm going to use that number here. So I'm now pulling the number of grid columns from the configuration. So you can see that works just fine on the Nexus S because it's not very wide. I turn it in landscape, it's still one column. If I go to maybe the 7-inch tablet, I should see there we've got 2 columns in landscape, or 3 columns, or sorry, 2 columns in portrait, 3 columns in landscape, and 10-inch. There we go. So 2 there, 3 here.
Mr. Smith, can you go back to the Dimens files? I just want to make sure I got the right stuff inside.
Yep.
So that is, okay.
So all 3 of the files have a grid columns and an item property, item height property. It's just the grid columns value changes from file to file.
Yeah, 600 was 2.
600 was 2. So the first one, the default is 1. 600 is 2, 900 is 3.
And what did you do after that? You went to the
main activity, I just needed to pull that value. So I'm basically leveraging the Android resource system to give it the proper number of columns.
Well, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. So it's basically, as I said, it's basically like a media query. You know, in HTML and CSS, you can say, well, use this CSS if it's wider than, if the screen is wider or narrower than this number. And so that's what I'm doing. If it's 600 or wider, then use this. If it's 900 or wider, use this. And so problem solved. It works on all the devices, and it looks pretty good. Now, the last bit that I want to mention, you'll notice that when I, because we're mostly done here, when I click on one of these items, nothing happens, right? So one of the things that we had happening originally, remember, was if I clicked on an item, it would add it to the cart. Does everybody remember that?
Yeah.
So I need to re-implement that behavior. Okay. So in terms of how to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the adapter first and change, add a little bit more logic. So you remember that we wrote these onCreate Viewholder and the onBind Viewholder methods. Okay. I can potentially do this logic in either place. It really depends on what your needs are. In this case, my need is I need it to kind of know which item it's clicking on. And so because I need it to know which item I'm clicking on, I need to do it in onBind Viewholder. And that usually is going to be the right place to do it. So in onBind Viewholder, I'm going to hook up an onClick lister. So I'm going to tell it when you click on the item, do this. So in here, at the end of onBind Viewholder, I'm going to say, holder dot item view. Just remember that's the whole item. We're going to set on click listener. New on click listener. So when you click on the item, then maybe I'm just going to show a toast. And that toast is going to be what the name of the item is. Now, I immediately run into a problem because what's the first argument to make text?
Context.
A context. I don't have a context. I do not have a context. And this is frequently a problem when you're working with the recycler view. You frequently run into this problem. And the solution is actually dirt simple. The thing is I don't have it down here because I didn't save it up here. So if I had just saved the context that I received here, I would have had it further down there. So I really just need to go in here and save it. So private context. That's really the solution, is you just need to save it as a field here. If you look online for that very problem, you will find a lot of complicated solutions that people have concocted when that's really all you need to do, is you just need to save the field. If you look on Stack Overflow, you will find something probably more complicated than that. But that's really all you need to do in terms of accessing the content in the adapter, is you just save the one that's passed in the constructor. So going back down here, I now have that context, which I can just refer to as context. And now I can say, let's show the item's name. So item.getName. And then toast dot length short dot show. Now, sometimes, depending on the situation, this may give it, it's not giving me an error on this version, but sometimes I have found, if you're nesting things like this, in terms of anonymous classes or such, sometimes this will complain because item, well, is kind of in here. It might change. So sometimes you may have to, depending on the version of Android, historically I remember having to sometimes mark this one as final, which just means we're assigning that value once and it doesn't change. Doesn't seem to be a problem anymore, but I remember historically sometimes we had to mark that as final.
So if you click anywhere on it, it will work now,
yes. Right? Yeah, so you can literally click anywhere, any control, and it will work. Not just on the image, you can click anywhere on the item. So common things we do with that is you might say, well, I want to open up another activity to view that item, right?
Yeah, like clicking the name or something.
Yeah. Well, no, clicking anywhere. So click anywhere on here, and it would take you to maybe view the item. So that's a common thing we do here. And so I don't think we have enough time today to go through the second screen, what you would do on the second screen, unfortunately. But what I do, so I will kind of show you how to get it started, and then leave the rest of that as kind of an exercise for you to figure out, because I think you can figure out most of the stuff from here. What I would do is kind of like we've done before. I would create an intent. And so that intent would point you to, say, new intent. Similar problem, the intent needs a context. And so that's how we solve the problem, is by saving the context up here. So context, and then we would point it to the second activity. So I'd say order activity dot class, because I don't have an item view activity right now. And then I would say, well, we want to include some information about, say, which item we're showing. So I'd say product dot intent put extra, and so this would be like product ID, and I would put in the item dot get ID. So I'd pass through the product ID, and then I might say then context dot start activity.
Would you really want to have everything in that, like the picture, the word donut, all that? You wouldn't want that to be clickable.
Absolutely, you want all that. Absolutely, you want all that to be clickable.
Okay, but wouldn't it be tough to scroll?
No, it won't be, because the click action is two things. It's a press and then a release. So if I press and then release there, that's a click. But if I press and then scroll, see? The click event only fires when you release the button. It doesn't, the click does not fire just when you press it. Does that make sense, Paul?
Yeah, I understand.
So I would say overwhelmingly most apps, the whole thing is clickable. Usually these items are so small that if you were to say you have to click this particular area, that it might be a problem, more of a problem than that. The other thing that happens, we usually don't put buttons or anything like that on here. You can potentially, and then you would just say, in here, just like I could say that I only make the image clickable, and that would be pretty easy. I'd just change this from, item view to image, and now just the image is clickable. That's all you would need to change. It's just what you're connecting the on-click listener to. But I would say overwhelmingly, most apps lean towards the whole thing being clickable. And I think that's usually turns out to be the more usable thing instead. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think that most users have the problem of that, confusing a click and a scroll. I could be wrong, but I've not, that's not been my experience. Any questions?
Let's see. We got to do this on our project then. Something like this.
Yep, something like this. And so, most part, I'd expect at some point you're going to have a list. You can click on that list and then maybe see more details on it, or you click on that and maybe you edit the item.
Okay, so for just talking in terms of the restaurant menu builder there, I'm not ready yet quite to take information from the add or edit item and have that populated. I just need to make some dummy data to show up on the first page. That's it.
Yeah, some dummy data would be a starter there.
Whoa, okay. Yeah, it's a lot of... There is no way I'll be able to do this without the video.
I'm sorry. I hope you have at least you have all the code in front of you.
Oh, yeah, sure. But sometimes you need the explanation, or you got to do things in the right order.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to remember that. I'll
put the video up. But I think you'll also see where I said, yeah, this will probably take the whole session.
I totally see that. If this is the hardest thing we'll do for, I looked at the schedule we got coming up, and I want to say, like, once we get into April, we're not getting new material. Am I right?
No. Let me look at the calendar.
No, nothing in the code labs. I guess that would be the end of the code lab.
That's the end. Yeah, we'll finish up the textbook in March. It is not the end of new material. We'll have new material throughout April. It just won't be from the textbook.
Okay.
So, some of the things that the textbook doesn't cover is Picasso, which is what we're going to use to load images. Volley is one thing to work with web services. Retrofit is also one we'll talk about for connecting to REST APIs, like we built in. Remember, we built REST APIs back in third semester.
Yes, I remember that.
So those are the kind of things that we'll start connecting back up. In April, that's basically where we're looking. April, we're going to start connecting back up to some of the things we learned, some of the things that we did in with Node.
Well, yeah, we're not. We're using Firebase, not SQL or Mongo, right?
We're talking about Firebase. What I'll probably do for these 2 weeks here, the 5th through the 16th, is I've got a Node.js application already spun up on Heroku, and so I'll probably give you basically a Node.js application to connect to that's already built, is my plan.
Okay.
So it's like there's a web API, there's a REST API you can connect to, write the code for your app to work with it. So that's kind of the plan.
All right, great. Okay. So that's it for today then, right?
That's it for today. And so on Monday we'll maybe have a short lecture on some of the stuff in 4.4. And Tuesday I think is just a lab day.